Welcome to today's session on successfully engaging families during the child outcome summary process. We'll be sharing our experience in Virginia with using the decision tree as a tool for supporting that family engagement. And hopefully we'll get you thinking about some ways that you can enhance family engagement in the child outcome summary process as well, or sharing ideas about how you already do that. So I'm Kyla Patterson. I'm the early intervention team leader at the Department of Behavioral Health and Developmental Services, which is the state lead agency for Part C in Virginia. And if we can advance the slide, Lisa. Did you already advance it and it didn't show?
Nope, sorry, I just advanced it.
That's okay. And I'll let Lisa introduce herself as well.
Hi, everyone. I'm Lisa Terry. I am an early intervention professional development consultant in Virginia with the Partnership for People with Disabilities at Virginia Commonwealth University. And welcome. We're so excited to have you all today.
Great. So if you have questions or comments as we go along, please feel free to type those in the chat or the Q&A. Just so you know, the Q&A section is public and everybody participating will be able to see that. The chat is not, but I'll be able to see it and we'll be sharing that for the benefit of everyone else. So we'll address as many questions as we can as we go along, and then we'll come back to any others at the end as time allows. And then just one final reminder before we get started, don't forget to access and download the handouts for the session that are part of the session listing. Well, we'd like to get started by getting you engaged right away as we talk about family engagement by asking what are some ways that you already support family involvement and family engagement in the child outcome summary process. So share your thoughts in chat.
So Kyla, I see some things popping up on my Zoom chat. Do you see those too?
I see that you have things in chat, but I can't see them. So we'll have to team this up and share the chat in the various platforms.
Sure. Okay, let me kind of go through some of the things that I'm seeing pop up. So interviewing during the evaluation. One person uses the routine-based interview to come up with the family outcomes. When another says that their state's new to the process, but they are requiring that the cost ratings be completed at an IEP meeting. Another says team engages family during the eval or first visit after the evaluation. And then the service coordinators are starting to process during the first contact and they're gathering some of that information. And then again, routines-based interview and then using that information that the family reported during the evaluation process and progress to review progress notes. And yet another RBI. So a lot of people, it looks like they're using some of that, the RBI and the routines-based interview. And then another says they're using a combination of interview and age anchoring tools.
Great. So I've got a few comments in the chat on Whova. A couple of people, again, using the routines-based interview, the RBI, talking about collecting information during initial intake. And another person has collected family input and data during home visits on an ongoing basis on, via virtual methods or in person. Again, another person with the routines-based interview. So we appreciate you sharing some of those ways that you're already engaging families in that process. So next slide, please. So I wanted to share just a little bit of the history in Virginia and some context for some of the work that we have done. And so in our Part C system in Virginia, we had long recommended the use of a decision tree as part of the team process to kind of assist in determining child outcome ratings, child summary statements. But as we focused on data quality and focused on sort of the consistency and accuracy of child outcome ratings. And then also we're talking in our state systemic improvement plan work about family engagement in the assessment process in general, as well as the child outcome summary process. As we sort of considered all of that, we reconsidered our use of the decision tree and thought about kind of more purposefully how that might help us achieve those goals that we had around consistency, accuracy, and family engagement in that process. So in 2018, we actually came to the conclusion that we would begin requiring the use of the decision tree at entry. So typically in Virginia, that's at the initial IFSP, at our annual IFSP, and at exit to support the decision about the child outcome rating or summary statement. Just so you know, in Virginia, the team assessment narrative section of our IFSP is organized by the 3 child outcome areas, and that's why we talk about using the decision tree also at the annual, so that those narratives and the summary statements at the end of each of those outcome sections, again, are arrived at in sort of a consistent way. So moving to the next slide, when we implemented the requirement to use the decision tree, we also revised the decision tree itself that we're using to support, again, those goals around consistency and family engagement. So teams are required not only to use the decision tree, but to actually walk through every step of the decision tree. And I want to kind of point out several really intentional choices that were made in the design of this version of the decision tree. So first, we have a reminder up at the top that the discussions and decisions that follow as you move through the decision tree need to be based on sort of the totality of all assessment information, wanting to make sure we're moving away from reliance on test items or evaluation scores when we're making these decisions about children's functioning. There's also a note under the top question to remind folks that performance of an age-expected skill that emerges at a much younger age is not enough to say yes to that question of whether the child ever functions in ways that would be considered age expected. So for example, smiling at a caregiver would not be considered age expected functioning for a 10-month-old. You'll notice that under each of the questions, there's a box that says, let's think of some examples. And that really helps ensure that the team is making thoughtful decisions in answering those questions, thoughtful decisions about the child's functioning compared to same age peers, and that we have evidence to support our decisions and our ratings. Color-wise, our previous version, the color scheme was red, yellow, and green, and we decided to move away from that to avoid any sort of connotation or comparison to the meaning of those colors in a stoplight. And then finally, we have the summary statements across the bottom that summarize the child's functioning compared to same age peers, and they correspond to what gets written in the team assessment narrative section on our IFSP at the end of each outcome area. So we have an open descriptor about the child's functioning in that particular outcome area, and then the statement that the team has arrived at as a summary of their functioning. The next thing to know about our required use of the decision tree is that not only do you have to use it, not only do you need to walk through all of the steps, but it needs to be laying on the table, for lack of a better expression. So whether that's literally a paper copy sitting in the middle of the table, or everybody around the table has a copy of it, or it's on a computer screen, it needs to be available for all team members, including the family, to see and reference during this conversation about the child's functioning. So again, I'm hoping you'll weigh in the chat and think about why it would be important to have a copy of the decision tree on the table during this decision. If it's something that you already do, tell us why and how that works for you. And if it's not something you do yet, just think about why it would be a good idea for there to be a copy for everybody to see.
I have something on the chat, Kyla. Without having a copy, it is really hard to explain the process to parents without the visual.
Very good, exactly. How about some other ideas about why it would be important to have a copy of the decision tree available for everyone to see as you're having this conversation?
Someone asked too, where are the handouts? So if we want to just mention again that the handouts are found on the session, they are all 3 uploaded, or I think there's 2 of them uploaded. If you go to the resource handout, that's where you'll find the decision tree.
Thank you.
No problem. Someone else said, provides more clarity as to why a child falls where they do. Some people are more visual learners, so it really helps break it down. So parents can be informed and they prepare to engage, yes, in the conversation. Yeah, they're giving the team some of that functional information, absolutely. And it makes it easier for the team, the parents included, to really openly discuss each step and the abilities, and keeps the process more objective. Sounds like they're nailing this answer, Kyla.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, I think the other thing we found in Virginia is it really sort of prevents drift, because we had a lot of people prior to this requirement being implemented who would say that they used the decision tree in their head for the process. And then once we required them to have it sort of on the table and literally walk through it, those people said, I was coming to different conclusions at the bottom of the decision tree than I was when I was using it in my head. So it's a concrete reference for the professional team members, as well as offering some transparency and support for everybody being actively engaged in the conversation. Great, thank you. So if we move to the next slide, sort of getting back to the decision tree document itself, on the reverse side of our new version of the decision tree that we implemented beginning in 2018, there is some information for families, specifically to support their engagement in the child outcome summary process. So here we explain why we measure the child outcomes, what each outcome includes, and how the family is involved in this process. So several people talked about that a little bit when they talked about why it would be on the table, and we have this backside to help with that as well. Okay, so moving to the next slide. Thank you. You know, since families are equal team members, it really is appropriate and respectful that they're included in the process of team discussions and decisions about how their child's functioning in the 3 child outcome areas, and that they can see the decision tree that we're using to make those decisions. And it was a change for many, if not most, of the local systems in Virginia. And there were a lot of concerns and questions about the process, and in particular concerns that engaging families in this process might be more challenging and maybe uncomfortable in some situations. And we'll talk a little bit later about some of those specific concerns that came up and how we've tried to work through those and support folks in engaging families in more challenging situations. We really emphasize that given that one of the purposes of early intervention is to help families, enable families to provide care for their children, and that one of the family outcomes we measure is the extent to which early intervention helps families communicate their children's needs, that for those reasons, that it was really a worthwhile and important effort to sort of get through this learning curve, get past some of our own discomfort to fully engage families in using the decision tree with us. Next slide, thank you. So from a practical standpoint of what we wanted to see people doing in practice, we communicated in Virginia that we expected that the service coordinator and the other professional team members would support family engagement in the child outcome summary process by doing 3 kind of big things. The first was explaining basic information about why we focus on the 3 child outcome areas, how the decision tree is used, and then how those summary statements that we arrive at the bottom of the decision tree are used. Secondly, that we expected those other team members to be encouraging families to share information about their child's functioning in each of the outcome areas. And third, encouraging family participation in the team discussion at every question and decision point in the decision tree. And again, the information that we had on the reverse side of the decision tree is designed to help with that, especially with that sort of explanation and preparation step. And then before I pass this over to Lisa to talk about a scenario and some of the questions and issues we addressed as we launched this requirement, I just wanted to take a minute and share some data that we have around the impact of this work. So on this slide, you can see the increase that we've seen in the use of the decision tree from 2017, when we really weren't talking much about this. It was recommended, but it wasn't something we were really focusing on, to 2018, when we were getting ready to launch the new requirement, to 2019, when it had been implemented for several months. And this data comes from an annual survey that we conduct with our practitioners in Virginia to look at implementation of the evidence-based practices that we're implementing as part of our state systemic improvement plan. And other results from that survey also indicated that practitioner perceptions and attitudes had also changed significantly over this same period of time with regard to the value of using the decision tree and the value of including families in that child outcome summary process discussion. So I will turn it over to Lisa.
Thanks, Kyla. Okay, so now we're going to get into a little bit of the fun part where we're going to actually apply the decision tree just so you guys can see it a little bit more. Again, you do have this handout for the scenario. If you go into the Whova app and you see below under our session with the handouts, this is the scenario for Amara. So if you don't have that handy, feel free to pull it up and then you can kind of follow along, but I'm going to go ahead and read the scenario. But what we're going to do for this portion, we're going to really discuss how Amara acquires and uses knowledge and skills, including early language and communication. So that's really going to be our focal point. So let's listen to her scenario. And what I would ask you to do as you listen, really consider how Amara's functional development compares to other children her age across multiple settings and situations. Okay, so Amara learns primarily by mouthing toys and using her hands. She mouths unfamiliar objects. She enjoys playing with her Mega Blocks, putting them in and out of the box. She does not always look at the pieces when she's playing with them. Amara loves any toys that produce sound and watching those animated television shows. She loves movement activities like spinning with her dad or playing hide and seek with her mom. Amara's frustration can interrupt her learning. For example, she likes to line her farm animals, but then she begins to throw them when they fall. Amara's mom stated she does not always seem to enjoy playing with toys, and the only way to make her laugh is to tickle her. Amara was observed turning pages in a book and started to point at random pictures on the page. Amara's dad stated that pointing in books is really new for her. They read to her every night before bed. Amara's mom added, they have noticed Amara does not move her mouth as much as her cousin who is her age. She tries to imitate some of the things she sees her cousin doing when outside, like going down the slide on her tummy. Her mom describes Amara as lacking awareness around her the majority of the time. Amara's only word is all for ball. She uses a sign for eat, more, and please. Amara was heard babbling using some consonant sounds today during play. She had some B's, some W's, and D's, but in all vowel sounds. Amara is building her understanding of language and not yet following directions given by her parents. So coming up, Amara will start to point to pictures and objects to let her parents know that she understands the names for them. She'll start to use more sounds and put them together to make words. Amara will explore her toys in her home more by looking at them during play. So this is just a little snippet of Amara and some background information. And then on the screen, I'm just going to read this in case anybody's just listening in, but we also did go ahead and provide some age and developmental levels for Amara. So she's about 23 months. Her receptive language is 4 months. Her expressive language is 6 months. Her adaptive and self-help skills is at 18 months. Her social emotional, 7 to 11 months. Her cognitive at 7 months. Her gross motor at 21 months, and then her fine motor at 16 months. So now let's take some of that information that I just read to you, and we're going to start talking about the decision tree and how we use it. But before we do that, I just want to note again and really re-emphasize that it's just really important for everyone, including the family, to be looking at the same document. I will share previously, I was a supervisor and I would go out and observe a lot of different assessments. And I'll tell you that during my observations, this was before the decision tree was required, this whole process, it was just really awkward. I guess that's the best way to describe it. It was really awkward. It was definitely awkward for the families, especially because the families knew that the other team members were discussing something or looking at something, but they weren't really sure or involved in the process. And so that's the difference that I've noticed the most. Once the decision tree was brought out for everyone and it had to be on the table, everyone had a copy, then the family members, they were glued in and they were also a part of the process. And so that really took away some of that awkwardness that I felt like parents kind of from an observer's point of view, that you could just see the awkwardness that they felt too. So I am going to just give you an example of how I would explain this to a family. So typically what I would say is, let's just look at this decision tree together. So as we mentioned before, we use this to come up with a statement that best fits Amara's functional development compared to other kids her age. So we will specifically be focusing on how Amara acquires and uses knowledge and skills, including her early language and communication. So then I would give a little bit more detail and explain to the parents that this is really how Amara is learning, how she's problem solving, how she's remembering things. And a big component is also her language in this area. And this is how she's using or how she's showing us what she understands, which I also know that was a really big concern that you mentioned at the intake. And so first, what we're going to do is we're going to go to this very top question, and we're going to ask, does Amara ever function in ways that would be considered age expected with regard to this outcome? So before we continue on this discussion, generally, I really like to give some information on what we would expect typically at this age. So I would let parents know, typically at this age, we know that children have about 50 words. They're really beginning to put phrases together. They're imitating the words that you say. They're following simple directions like going to get something. When reading, they begin to point and name pictures. Their attention is really increasing. Imitation is seen throughout their day in play and using sounds and words. And I think that that's a really important piece to give everybody, including the parents, just a little bit of the expectations of what we're looking at when we're comparing to same age peers too. I also think it's really important for other team members too to hear that, because sometimes we work with so many different kids, and so it's really nice for everybody to hear this information before we're actually discussing this and going down the decision tree. Okay, so what I want us to do now is I want us to think of some examples together. So this is the part where we would typically talk as a team. We'd say, okay, let's think of some examples together. So go ahead and type those in chat. Think of some examples that would that Amara is doing that's functioning in this area of acquiring and using knowledge and skills. Go ahead and type that into chat. What is Amara doing at this age in regards to acquiring and using knowledge and skills? And I can't see the other chat, Kyla, so if you can watch that one and I'll watch the Zoom chat.
Absolutely.
Thank you. And it might be hard to remember because that was a long scenario if you don't have it pulled out in front of you. So if that's the case, that's okay. I see one thing coming in. She's playing independently. Yeah, for short periods of time with her blocks. Yeah, she likes putting her blocks in and out. Yes, she's imitating her peers during outside play. Yeah, she's watching her cousin and she's trying to go down the slide on her tummy, just like her cousin's doing, right? Yeah, so those are some great examples. She's also, remember she was saying all for ball, right? And she's really starting to babble throughout her day. So then we're going to really pause and we're going to think about this question again after we think of some examples. So does Amara ever function in ways that would be considered age expected with regard to this outcome? So what would we say here? We really think about that question. We think about some of the examples compared to what she should be doing at this typical peers are doing at this age. What would we say? We'd probably go with no, right? And so we're going to have that discussion. So we're going to really consider, yeah, thanks for jumping in, Allie. Yeah, no. So we are going to consider statements 1 through 3. Oh, yep, see, we got another no. Great, yeah. And so it helps for our consistency too with our answers when we talk about that and we have that discussion. Oops, sorry. So we're going to consider statements 1 through 3 right here, right? So note that even though we decided that the answer was no, that we still did start that discussion of the things that Amara is doing, right? So you guys gave some good examples of things that Amara is doing. So using the decision tree with families, it really doesn't require us to lose our strengths-based focus. It's just going to help ensure that we have a balanced and a really complete discussion about the child's functioning compared to same-age peers. And I think the key word there is balance, right? We're going to have that balanced discussion. So next, what we're going to ask is Amara using functional skills that are close to age-expected functioning. So again, let's think of some examples. What are some things that she was doing again? And let's think about if she's close. Oh, Allie, I see you're in the chat. Yep. Allie said she has the skills of a younger child, which are the foundation for what she needs to become age expected. Yeah. So you're already getting us near the bottom statement. So we know that Amara likes some of that in and out play, right? But she doesn't always like to look at toys. She's really playing with them unless they have a sound component. That's what she really is attracted to. And then she's babbling throughout her day. So in this area, again, what would we say? Is Amara using functional skills that are close to age expected functioning? Excuse me. You guys can throw it in the chat. Yep, no. So we are going to continue down the decision tree, right? And so here, what we're going to find in this outcome area, do we all agree with statement 1 that Amara has the very early skills in this area? So this means that Amara has the skills that we would expect for a much younger child, right? And I know sometimes that this can be a really uncomfortable conversation when a child's statement shows those very early skills. And it's one of those conversations that we just can't avoid, right? Because it's really helpful to make sure that we're explaining the development of peers this age to really give parents a more thorough understanding as we're asking these questions. Parents who may sometimes, I have found, have a difference of opinion about their child's level of functioning. That's sometimes just due to a lack of understanding of age expectations and child development, right? So thinking of examples, it's really beneficial to add to the discussion. And in this case, Amara's parents, they already seem like they're aware that she's behind, right, in her development, because you notice that they're starting to compare her to her cousin. And so sometimes I think that our own discomfort might come from, obviously not wanting to hurt the parents, but they probably already know to some extent. So that's going to kind of move us on. This is just an example of how to use a decision tree, but this is good. We're going to move our conversation into maybe some of those challenges that you might see, or some of the things that might come up. So one of the things that came up are these courageous conversations, right? So I want you guys to be so completely honest here. Type in chat, yes or no, if you get a bit uncomfortable when you are discussing the child outcome summary statement, or you're discussing those developmental age levels with a family whose child has the skills of a much younger child. Yes, yes, I see him. Yes, 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 exclamation points, right? Yeah. Oh, we got a no there. Yeah. And honestly, I mean, I do too. And it's one of those things that sometimes it takes practice to have those conversations. But I mean, of course we feel that way. And it's because we don't want to add to the family's worries about their child, right? And we are in this field because we're passionate about the field. We're passionate about helping families. And so there's always that fear of hurting. Yeah, Lena says, I lose sleep in anticipation. Yeah, it can be one of those things that feel really uncomfortable for us. But, it's really important for us to be honest, though, and share complete information with families. Yeah, Allie says, especially when parents are not close to being on the same page. Yeah, those disagreements can be a little bit difficult, right? It makes it uneasy with us. But the thing that you want to really remember is that you are about to ask this family to make decisions about the outcomes that they want for their child. And then you're going to really plan together those services to address those outcomes. So that courageous conversation, although that might be a little uncomfortable, they're necessary, right? So how do you guys prepare for that? So what I want you to do is type in chat, what are some strategies that you use to prepare yourself for that kind of conversation besides losing sleep? What do you guys do? How do you prepare for that conversation? So what are some strategies that you use to prepare for that conversation? Yes, Laura, practice, especially some of that role playing. Like if you have a peer, another colleague, just practice with them having those conversations too. I used to do that all the time with my interns, any new employees that I had. Even though role playing is always a little bit awkward, it really does help you not stumble sometimes upon your words. Yeah, let's see what else we have. Oh, yep, our team starts with strengths and practice. Yes, Michelle. Starting with strengths is always important because you really want to build that family up too before you have those harder conversations. Yeah, brainstorm with other team members. I love that. You're getting some input. You're getting some feedback from other colleagues, other team members too. Yes, stress the positive. Yeah, and I love not only just stressing the positive too about what the child's doing, but what the parents are doing, right? Like I love how you're picking her up and engaging her in eye contact when you're throwing her up in the air and she's smiling and laughing at you when you're tickling her. Really being very specific with families. Yes, Laura, using the school psychologist. These are conversations that they have all day and they can help you get prepared. I love that idea. And it's really helpful if you guys don't have access to someone like that, maybe even bringing someone in who works in your local system or another agency, or maybe you have somebody that you collaborate with that you can bring in and really talk to your staff about this too, and generate some of those ideas. That's a great idea. Yeah, talk about the positives, really reinforce to the parents why to getting services. Yes, using the sandwich method. I love that, Candace, the sandwich method. So you're starting and you're ending with positive. So you're going to be positive. You might address some of the challenges or the areas of growth, and then you're going to add some more of those positives. Yeah, I only have the summary discussion at the end of the IFSP. So I start with to prep the family weeks ahead of time, talking about where they have concerns, but mostly focusing on how the family grew over time together. I like that, Sarah, because you're really starting to just do it over time, and the parents are having time to really process some of that information. And so that's a great way too. And if you aren't doing something over time, I always suggest giving the family a follow-up phone call afterwards, because they might have, needed some of that time to process it, and then they might have questions later, and that's okay. Yeah, Emily, be honest. Yeah, she said, I would caution people about that too. Focusing too much on the positive can be very confusing to parents. Oh, speaking as a former EI parent, I like that you brought that up too, Emily, because I will say that there was a study by Blue Banning, and they mentioned that parents really express the desire for open and honest communication, no hidden information, no candy coating of bad news. And so they recognized that this information was really hard for them to hear sometimes, but they wanted to hear it, and they recognized that they needed to hear this information. But tact is really important, right? So we need to make sure that we're being sensitive to the information, making sure that it's being conveyed in private. Especially we're avoiding implications of blame. And I don't know, Emily, if you can speak to that as an EI parent, but we do want to make sure that we watch our words, because we don't want to place any blame on the parent. Sometimes we have to really stop and pause and recognize our own biases too, because what can happen if we have any of our own judgments, we might accidentally let that come out in those conversations with families. And most of the families that I've worked with, they've really opened up about the guilt that they feel. Like, is this my fault? Is my child behind because of me? Should I have done this better? And so parents are holding that even if they're not telling you. Yeah, she said parents have a lot of guilt and question. Yep, it's part of that grieving process. Absolutely. Yeah. So remember to make sure that we are really balancing those positive comments as well as the challenges. Great discussion, guys. Kyla, did you want to add anything else before we go to the next one?
No, I think we've got it. You've got a lot of great comments there, and I don't have anything to add from the chat here.
Yeah. Oh, Marisol added to being comfortable with being uncomfortable. I love that. Yes, being comfortable with being uncomfortable, practicing empathy, not sympathy. Another tip that I always have anybody that I'm training that's new into the field is practice your face in front of the mirror. Practice, really know what your face is looking like to other people and look at your reactions, because sometimes we're just not aware of the faces that we make and what that can portray to a family. Absolutely. Okay, so let's go on to another challenge that we may encounter, which is, and somebody mentioned it earlier, but it's the difference of opinions in teams. So one thing that I really like about the decision tree is that it really does ensure that everyone's on the same page. We're talking about the same questions, we're talking about the same examples, and I think honestly, sometimes people are afraid to disagree, when really those disagreements can actually be a gateway to helping you think in other ways or understanding things differently. And I think we all just need to move towards that, that sometimes disagreements are helpful. They're not always, people sometimes tend to think that disagreements, they see them in a negative way, but it actually can teach us, and we can actually learn from other people's perspectives. So we just have to be open to do that. So one way to help with some of those differing opinions is to really discuss those specific examples. And that's really why we added it on the decision tree as a prompt, a discussion prompt, because we do want to make sure that we're talking about that. Everyone usually has something to add. One of the things I have seen, sometimes it might be just one person that might add to the conversation. And so, it does help sometimes to have somebody that facilitates that conversation, says, hey, do you want to add anything else? Or ask the parent, would you like to contribute anything else? Do you have anything else you'd like to add to this conversation? So that way you're actually seeking that input from each person individually, rather than just kind of waiting for someone to speak up, especially when you think about temperaments and personalities, because some people tend to be a little bit more shy and quiet, and some people tend to be a little bit more, talk a little bit more too about that. but everyone does have something to add. Another thing too, if you're like me, I don't always remember everything because we talk about so much information, right? So I don't always remember everything. So when we talk about those examples, sometimes it does really help hearing another team member kind of chime in, and they're bringing up something like another specific example, like when the child's out in the community. And I might not have thought about that at the time when I'm considering that question. So it is really helpful. I can't stress enough really making sure that you're following the flow of the decision tree, not only for that family engagement piece, but also, just like you guys said, why it's very helpful, because it is that visual prompt to help guide the process. Because again, when you do try to follow it in your head, it's just going to leave some room for error in your own decision-making process, and then also room for misunderstandings across team members. And so you really do want to make sure that you're following the flow. Another thing that I'll say, before, when I was observing assessments, and this was before the decision tree, another awkward moment. There were people, like when we got to this part and we were discussing the statements, there were times that providers would just throw out numbers behind their back, like they'd like do the like number 3 behind their back, like, and just kind of guessing. And so so again, that's why it's really important to just make sure you're following that flow across. And we do say statements to the families because we think it sounds a lot, but even though we know that they're ratings, it just statement sounds a lot better too. So let's think about some of those strategies. So what I want you to do, type in the chat, what are some strategies that you use to reach consensus on the child outcome summary statement? So what are you guys doing to reach that consensus? If I can talk, consensus. Type that in the chat. Yeah, meet the family where they are too. And I love like that too, like making sure like we're checking in with the family, asking some of those open-ended questions to get a good feel for where they're at. Ask people what they can live with. Where can we compromise? Yeah, Cindy, we really want to make sure that we can like learn to compromise. And let me go back. I'm going to show this really quick. Sorry, watch your eyes. And you'll see that here on the decision tree, when we look at this, this is a different color. These two are different colors. These are the same color right here, 2 and 3. 4 and 5 are the same color, and 6 and 7 are the same color. And so sometimes when we have some of those difference of opinions, like if you're really deciding between something that's really aligning a little bit closely to the same color, then that's okay, whichever one that you guys tend to just compromise with. The main thing is you don't want to go to these different colors, right? That's a little bit more of a conversation because that's a little bit more drastic. Yeah, so let's see. Let me check back in with the chat. Yeah, the conversation is family-led, but guided by the service coordinator and provider. Yeah, so really letting the family lead that conversation. And we have to really make sure that we're giving families enough information so they feel confident to lead that conversation, right? So that's why it's really important that we're sharing information with them. We're giving them the information. We're setting it up very nicely for success for them. Okay, so let's go to another challenge. Kylie, did you see anything else in your chat on your end?
Yeah. No, I didn't. No.
Okay, so it looks like we're just using this chat, right?
Like it, yes.
Okay. All right, so let's go to something else. Okay, so this can be really true, especially in large areas, but I would just love to hear from you guys. Think about this question and type this in the chat. How do you ensure consistency when your teams are always inconsistent? So what that means is that you have these assessment teams that might not work together all the time. Like sometimes people have assigned assessment teams that work together all the time. So they know each other like the back of their hand. They know the process. They know who's going to do what's going to happen. So what do you do when they don't? Like say it's 2 different team members who have never met before and they're going to do an assessment together. So how do you ensure that consistency when teams are always inconsistent? Yeah, supervision. Yes. definitely. Making sure we're having supervision. We're doing some role play at staff meetings. Love it. Case reviews. Yeah. And we actually have in our resource handout too, there's some learning bites that you can actually use too as a good case review that could help. Having clear roles on assessment teams. Absolutely. So talking about it, right? Not talking about it while you're standing in front of the family's house because the family might think you're talking about them, but maybe a phone call, a quick phone call, and getting everyone on the team together to really talk about who's gonna, maybe facilitate the conversation a little bit more. Yes, absolutely. Yeah, planning and talking before. Yep, delegating those roles. And that is really important because it just, you need to know who's going to do what before you go in. It just makes it a little bit smoother. Yeah, building that consistency, yes, by using the decision tree. And that's the point of the decision tree, right? Because we're all having the same discussion. We're all looking at the same thing. Yeah, setting those clear expectations before meeting with the family each time. Yeah, deciding our roles. So that is really helpful that people are finding pre-planning introductions. Yeah. Emily says, I know it's hard and easier said than done, but review any information that you have prior to the meeting. It can be really hard, right? But yes, it is absolutely really helpful for everyone to make sure that they are reviewing all the information before walking into an assessment too. And also that helps with that parent relationship, that parent rapport that you're building too. Because parents do notice. It's kind of like when I'm in the doctor's office and I'm taking my son and they come in and I'm like, did you not read like what happened last time? Like, do you not know what's going on? And so parents definitely, they kind of do get that tuned in feeling with that. Yeah, communication advance. It would be nice to build consistency around what each outcome means. Yeah, Carrie, I know that that's been talked about a lot too. And I don't necessarily there's not anything national level, right, with that?
Well, there are some descriptions that are available, and there's a nice recent thing about the breadth of each outcome area that I think was from ECTA that I know we're going to be sharing in Virginia for teams to use, and we're considering actually switching out the back of our decision tree and putting that on there, but because we think it also does give some helpful information for teams and families to be thinking consistently and completely about what falls in each of those outcome areas.
Thanks. Yeah, Kylie, that's helpful to know too. If you guys go to the resource handout, I believe we have the ECTA links on there. So check that out so you can see. Okay. So yeah, you guys nailed it, really following those tips. So let's go to the next slide. And oops, I'm just getting ahead of myself. Okay. So we have 2 quotes from 2 early interventionists that we got after we really implemented it. And early interventionists really started to begin to see this as a tool to enhance family engagement and teaming. And again, I will tell you that these same interventionists, they're a little bit hesitant on implementing the decision tree at first, as many were, because like anything that we're doing new in the field, and you don't feel confident, you don't feel comfortable doing or facilitating those conversations, especially when you have to have those conversations with families, it's a little bit harder and it makes us a little bit more fearful, in all honesty, and that's okay. But what I want to do is I am going to read each of these quotes from these providers, and I want you to pick out what stands out that's similar between both, and then we'll talk about it. So the first one was from Gisetta Tomei, and she said, the decision tree is a wonderful tool to visually and verbally involve parents in the child outcome summary process for each indicator area. Parental involvement is key to be true to the family-centered approach, and the decision tree allowed us to stay true to this model. And here's the second quote from Catherine Verschelli. She said, I loved the decision tree because it included the parents and gave them a better understanding of the state indicators. It also allowed them to understand their child's strengths and areas in which early intervention will help using the family-centered approach to meet their child's milestones. So what's similar between, let's see if you guys caught on to that. Go ahead and type that into chat. Yep, we have the parents. It's really focused on parents. Let's go a little bit deeper. Yep, use of the decision tree, yes. let's think about some of that. Think of that family engagement. Yep, that parent involvement. And what's a big concept in early intervention? Think that way. Push a little bit more of that. What's the big concept in early intervention? What's the approach that we want? Yes, involvement of parents. You got it. Family-centered approach. You guys are nailing it. Yeah, that collaboration with parents. And all of that's important, right? Because at the end of the day, in early intervention, we are focused on that family-centered approach, right? Because we know how important it is to make sure that we are collaborating, we are engaging parents in the process throughout their time in early intervention. And so I just thought that was so funny. I was like, wow, like 2 quotes, 2 different times, and they both talked about how it really does contribute and stay true to the family-centered approach. So yeah, thank you for that. And thank you all for chiming in. And I think, one thing to remember is that it's just going to take time. It's going to take practice. And you just, got to find your groove when you're implementing it into practice. But you will get there, I promise you, because a lot of people in Virginia have too. So if this is something you guys are doing now or you want to, just take time and practice. All right, so I just wanted to show you what the resources handout, and I'm going to highlight a couple of them. So we do have the scenarios, so feel free to take these back and use them and practice them in your own locality. Here are the decision tree, English and the Spanish version, and then here's the EPTA resources, and so that might be where Kyla was mentioning that new resource that's out now, and the age anchoring determination guidance. We do have our definition, Virginia's definition of functional assessment on here. We also have a tutorial for using the decision tree. So let's say this might be something you want to do. We have a tutorial that you can go back and watch. And then we also have our key tips. We also have an example of functional assessments, examples of questions to ask. There's also a template for gathering some of the information. Like I found when I was in an assessment that it was really hard for me sometimes I told you guys I couldn't remember things. So it was hard for me to remember things as we were going through. And so it really helped me in each outcome area to kind of jot down notes as we were talking with the family's permission, of course. And then here's the learning bite scenario too as well. And then there's some videos. So all of those resources are available to you. And then any questions, you guys feel free. I see some questions are coming in, so I'm going to go ahead and start reading those. Is Virginia using this approach as well with Part B that is less family-centered? I'm going to let you take that one, Kyla.
Yeah, I am not aware that they are using the same approach in Part B right now.
Then we have another question. Is it possible to share the presentation slides, or am I missing them in the resources? We didn't really add them. I can go back. We were limited to how many handouts we can put in. So let me see if I can add it. But I don't know. I don't remember if we had a lot of content actually on the slides, but I can add them. Be more than happy to do that. Any other questions?
I don't see any yet on my end, but just a reminder, if you logged in through the Whova app, you can use the Q&A through Whova to enter questions as well.
Wonderful. Well, if you guys don't have any questions, you got a few minutes before our next one. Yeah. Carrie said, can we say again where the resources are located? The resources are located under the session. Is that right, Kyla? You're looking at it. I can't say it. You can probably describe it better.
Yes. Yes, if you go to the agenda and click on this session and scroll down past the speakers and the description, the handouts are there to download. There are 3 of them, including the resources handout that Lisa just showed on the slide.
Thanks, Kyla.
I don't see any additional questions. Oh, I see one coming in for you.
Do you see that now?
I see them pop up, but I can't read the whole thing. So.
Oh, okay. Do you recommend completion prior to IFSP completion? So we have gone back and forth on when to do the cost meeting and if in eval, when to complete. So do you want to answer that one?
Sure. Yeah, we allow that to be a team decision, and some teams do it as part of the assessment, and some teams do it as part of the IFSP. And we do have teams, and depending on family preference, sometimes that assessment leads right into the IFSP meeting, so it sort of all mushes together. But we allow that it can be done either way.
Great. Looks like we just got a couple thank yous too. A great session. Alice asks, what do you do when teams lose contact with families at exit?
Yeah, so there definitely are differences in how this works at exit, depending on whether we're able to bring a team together as formally as we do at entry or at annual IFSP. So if we are not able to engage the family at exit, then one of the other things we have emphasized is this sort of points out the importance of good contact notes or progress notes, whatever that you call them in your state, and good documentation of ongoing assessment information collected as part of routine early intervention visits. And so we allow that even if we're not able to engage the family, that we can use that good contact note documentation, which includes updates from the family on their child's functioning and everyday routines. And if the professional team members feel that that gives them enough information, then they would use the decision tree, that ongoing assessment information, and report from families along the way to determine the exit ratings.
Thanks, Kyla. We have another question, and I love this question because I love, Cindy, that you guys are thinking about this a lot. But Cindy says, my state's planning to revise our preschool IEP to embed the cost process rating. We have searched and found only a small handful of states that have done this. Do you know of any exemplars that you might suggest? And I don't know personally, Kyla, I'm not sure if you do more on the national level.
I'm afraid I don't for the IEP side of, Maryland does. There's a,
oh, great.
Just
thanks, Catherine. Up. Maryland does. Yeah. I love this. I love the networking that can happen here. Oh, Colorado, it's just used for the IFSP. No fair birth to 5. Yes, we have our neighbors in Maryland and are using that for sure. Great. Wonderful. We have another minute, so any other last minute questions before the session ends up getting closed out on us? Thank you all. Just some things.
Thanks for participating and being active with your comments and sharing ideas. We appreciate that.